super glad to be here. Mariana's asked me to come down many, many times, and I just, for whatever reason, haven't been able to make it. So I'm thrilled to be here this year because this is an incredible event. I have had a small bit to do with Hacks and Hackers in the past, and it's just incredibly exciting to see this many people in this big an event. It's really special. So, Mariana asked me what I wanted to talk about today, and so I thought and put together a presentation. But if you know me, you'll know that one thing, I've been a journalist for many, many years. One thing I've never been particularly good at are headlines or titles. So anyway, I titled it Stuff We Made on the Internet, Why I Think This Stuff Matters to Our Readers and Our Bottom Line, with a slightly depressing, although also a tad hopeful bit at the end about the worrying state of the industry. So that's a little bit of a wordy title, but I think it actually describes what I'm going to be talking about today. Oh, thank you. Hi. That's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me online. I used to work there for 9 years. I ran a team called Interactive News, which is basically a product development team based in the newsroom. And now I work there at The Guardian, where I have 2 roles, which I'll tell you about in a second. And in November, I will be taking a position at Temple University in the journalism department as a professor of journalism, focused on new business models for journalism, entrepreneurial journalism, and the like. So this is kind of what I do right now at The Guardian. I have 2 hats, one on the sort of commercial side. I'm interim chief digital officer, and I run engineering, enterprise technology, product, and UX. So I'm responsible for our apps, our website, and everything else, as well as partially our digital strategy. But I'm not going to talk about that much today. I'm going to talk about this. In the newsroom, when I got to The Guardian, almost 2 years ago next week, I created a team called Guardian Visuals. It was modeled on National Public Radio's visuals team run by the brilliant Brian Boyer, who I think has been a speaker here. Yeah. He was last year, maybe? 2 years ago. Brian is great. And I totally, completely stole the concept of visuals from him. And what it is it brings together, the idea was to bring together photo, graphics, interactive, data, multimedia, video, all of this into audio, all into under one umbrella, and to create a team that has in its possession all of the raw materials for visual journalism, for great interactive multimedia journalism. And why did I want to do this? Because at the New York Times, this is one of the most frustrating things you can imagine. So I was there for 9 years. And the New York Times is a brilliant organization. It does arguably the best interactive visual journalism of any news organization on the planet, certainly up there. But getting teams together, particularly multidisciplinary teams, if you needed a developer, a designer, a photographer, it's extremely difficult because everything was very siloed. So they finally have fixed that. But when I was there, it was a nightmare. So that's the idea of Guardian Visuals, to put it all under one team and to be able to say, not, okay, the graphics desk happens to have gotten this story first, so it's going to become a graphic. Or the video team got the story first, so it's going to become a video. It allows us to pick the right tools for the job. And in addition to that, I run a team called Data Projects, which is what we would call in the States computer-assisted reporting, and a VR studio. We're just creating it now. We've done one piece, and I'll show you a trailer at the end, but we're going very, very deep into virtual reality, like many news organizations. But the kind of thing I'm going to focus on today, for reasons that you'll see in a minute, is under a broad umbrella, you could talk about it as sort of participatory journalism, as journalism that you kind of create in collaboration with your readers, or that you give readers the ability to create their own story. And that's basically what the Visuals team does. That's what my team at the New York Times did. That's what Visuals does, by and large. And so 3 kind of categories of participatory journalism I'm going to talk about. One is interactive, the ability to sort of interact with pieces of content. Collaborative and experiential, and I'll talk about those in a sec. But what do I mean by interactive? So this is our polling interactive from the elections. And so here we wanted to give the ability for a user to take really complicated and sometimes contradictory data, put it into context, but also give readers the ability to understand what it means, to understand what's going on today, what's going on, or how that's changed over time, and what this polling data could potentially mean for the future. And that's what you're seeing right there in this chart. Of course, if you followed the UK elections, you'll know that all the polling data was dramatically, catastrophically wrong. So this was, there was a lot of soul searching after this. Are we relying too much on poll data for elections? But the piece, I think, helped you understand and contextualize a lot of that data. This is our election night map, a beautiful, I think, cartogram made up of hexagons. We used a cartogram to represent population centers. That's why it looks like the United Kingdom has a weight problem. It's a little bit fat down there by London, because that's disproportionately where the population is, and why Scotland geographically is much larger than is represented on this map. But the important thing is, what you're seeing here is we're giving the ability to the reader throughout the night to interrogate this data in real time. I hate these kinds of interactives in general. And anytime someone proposes something like this to me, I almost always say no. And I said no when this idea first came up. And why? Why do I hate these kinds of interactives? Have you seen these kind of interactives where you do like budget balancing, where you can go online and like, here's the budget, and then you can like tweak the budget a little bit and maybe take a little bit of money out of defense or take a little bit out of here or there, and suddenly, boom, you've balanced the budget. I've seen those are very, very common, those kinds of interactives. And I hate them with the blazing intensity of 1,000 suns. And why I hate them with the blazing intensity of 1,000 suns is that they are completely devoid of any context. They don't tell you why, for example, you can't just simply reduce the defense budget by 10%. And if you did reduce the defense budget by 10%, you would have a line of members of Congress out your door screaming bloody murder, wanting your head. So that's the point that's what we're trying to solve with this. So we're trying to do two things. We're trying to show people how coalition governments come together, but also add some of the context behind it so they understand why it's not just as simple as putting two parties together. So we solve this in two ways, and I'm gonna play this again so you can see. One is this, so you can start by dragging one of the parties into that area, and you can see that the seats will change. So notice what happened there. So David Cameron was very happy when you dropped him in, but then you dropped the Green Party in, and they got very sad. So the faces changed. That's one visual cue that this might not be a great mix. The other thing you saw happen was a little bit of physics. Did you notice how those two bubbles suddenly pushed away from each other, and how the Green Party and the Labour Party, when it dropped in, how they kind of came together? Well, that was an idea that we were playing around with. It's almost like an like magnets. We wanted to have a sort of another visual cue to people that certain parties repel one another, certain parties attract to one another, and certain parties are kind of neutral. But then once you've done that, you want to understand why the Green Party got shot up here and why David Cameron's face all of a sudden got very sad. And so here down below, we did a sort of a grid where it's like, are these parties good together or bad together? And we explained why each one. So it does add the context. So this is one that I finally said yes to, but only with all of these contexts. We saw some beautiful home data visualizations earlier. This is one from my team. UK, incredibly expensive. Housing is incredibly expensive. It has, as you can see, blown up. This is an interactive we built using, I guess this data goes back to 1995, where you can just see how the housing market took off and boomed, and you can see by putting in a particular amount of money, a particular salary, where you can afford to live, and obviously the redder, the less affordable it is. This is a piece we did that I love so much, but we couldn't actually pay anybody to watch it. It got so few views, and I don't know why, but I still love it. So I'm on a singular mission to get as many people to see it as possible, which is why I present it at conferences. So we filmed this dance troupe as part of the Manchester International Arts Festival. They're from Brooklyn, New York, and you can see the slider up on the top going back and forth. There was a Honda ad actually recently, it was maybe 2 years ago, that was really clever, and we basically stole the concept from them, where as you're watching the video, you would hit the button R on your keyboard, and it would give you this sort of, one was a daytime cut and one was a nighttime cut. It was the same commercial, but two different flavors of that commercial, one sort of daytime and happy, one kind of nighttime and hipster. And so we want to do the same thing here. We put up 5 cameras around what's going on, and using your space bar, you can toggle between 2 different edits. I love it. This is another example of just a pretty straightforward visualization. We wanted to understand how, if China's imports continued to fall, how it would drag down potentially the world economy. So you can see here too, we're using a pretty straightforward metaphor. We're just dragging it right on down. And you can see how in particular countries, particularly Australia and New Zealand, which are incredibly dependent on the Chinese economy, you can see how they get pulled down even further than, say, the United States or Italy up at the top. So that's an idea of sort of the interactive elements of journalism that we do. Collaborative journalism. This is a screenshot of Guardian Witness. Guardian Witness is our, for lack of a better word, user-generated content platform. We solicit photos and stories from readers. It's a pretty generic platform that allows us to do a lot of things. You can see these are kinds of like sort of generic assignments, but we also use it in more targeted ways for stories like this one. Around the election, again, there was a lot of talk about immigration in the UK, and it was a huge issue, and a huge issue during the Brexit vote. But the one voice you were not hearing were the voices of actual immigrants. So we decided we were going to use Witness in part. Some of these were sourced through other means, but we decided we were going to use Witness to create a highly edited set of stories that in sum ended up telling a single story about immigration in the UK and how important it is, and adds a little color, flavor, and context to an issue that can be very divisive and very superficial. And so that's what that is. We've also done this piece, which is sort of an on-the-ground, almost reader-directed investigation. Ewan MacAskill, who, if you saw the Edward Snowden film, is featured fairly prominently. That's him right there. He's got one of the world's greatest Scottish accents. I was terrified to meet him because he's from Glasgow, which even a lot of people from England can't understand. A senior editor who will remain nameless used to pretend that her phone's connection was terrible when Ewan was calling because she couldn't understand a word he was saying. And don't tweet any of this, please. Anyway, Ewan's a lovely guy and an incredible reporter. And so we used Witness and comments and different tools we had at our disposal to have readers help us understand the situation of labor and why we're so wrong when we were interpreting both the election results and the subsequent leadership debate that led to Jeremy Corbyn taking over as Labour leader, which was somewhat surprising. Our inspiration, really, if you think about it, for me anyway, started with the Public Insight Network, which is a project of American Public Media, or Minnesota Public Radio, my hometown, my home state, Minnesota. It's a database of users, readers, listeners, of people and their expertise. That's all it is. It's very, very simple. And so when you're doing a story and you need to find a forensic accountant who might understand some of these numbers that you just are looking at this spreadsheet, you're looking at this data, you don't understand it, you might go to this Public Insight Network database and you might actually seek out listeners who have this expertise, who will be able to help you report your story. It's a simple, very straightforward way of involving readers collaboratively in your journalism, and it's surprising that more news organizations don't embrace this kind of approach. There are other little startups happening that are in this space. Harkin is one of my absolute favorite. Jennifer Brandel, who founded it, has a public radio background. And she started a project at WBEZ in Chicago called Curiosity, C-I-T-Y. It sounds great in English. I don't know that it's going to translate. Basically, it's a pun Curious City, Curiosity. Okay, I'm going to move on. Yeah, I know, it's terrible, actually. But the idea was, why do we not actually ask readers and listeners what's important to them? Why do we sit there as journalists pretending like we can simply read minds or that we know best? Why? And so Harken starts with a very simple concept, is just start with a question. And so here's the traditional approach of a cycle, of a story cycle, where that's the reporter there at the top, the green line, and the reader at the bottom. No communication until the story hits the website or paper or whatever. And then, boom, then and only then do people comment on it or have some ability to give you feedback as to whether this is actually relevant to them or not. Harken starts with a different approach. It starts by asking a simple question. And that question then can get voted on, and then that can result in better, ultimately, journalism that is more responsive. It's a little bit like, if you think about it, it's a little bit like doing sort of UX research in a sort of live journalism. The closest thing I've seen is doing sort of UX research live to improve news. And boy, does that sound like a good idea to me. And finally, experiential journalism. And so everybody is talking about, yes, VR, VR, VR. And this is an earlier speaker showed a clip from Noni de la Peña's piece on the Syria project. It's the first time I saw a piece of VR, and this is a pretty old piece, so it looks a little old, it looks a little dated. But it's the first time I saw a piece of VR and said, oh my God, this is journalism. This could absolutely be a form of journalism. It kind of blew my mind. And so everyone's kind of getting into it. The BBC is doing a ton. Obviously, the New York Times has gotten very deep into VR. They've really made it a core piece of their not just their editorial, but also their business. And this is our piece 6x9, which I love, love, love. And I am totally biased here, I will admit to you. But I do think this is one of the best examples of journalism using VR as a technique to tell a story you couldn't tell any other way. So 6x9 is a piece that's about solitary confinement. And it tries to put you in the position of someone in solitary confinement. And that's a really tricky story to tell because if you talk to many psychiatrists, and we talk to tons, they will tell you, I'm just gonna play the trailer. This is the trailer. There's no sound, so don't worry about it. If you talk to many psychiatrists, they'll tell you that actually this sort of treatment where you're locked in a 6x9 room for 23 out of 24 hours a day can be close to torture. In fact, some of them just flat out call it torture. It's a practice that, at least in the States anyway, is way too common. There's no supervision over it. It's very hidden because there's no disclosure until after the inmate has been released. How you end up in solitary confinement can be extremely arbitrary. And what happens to you while you're in solitary can be really difficult. What you're seeing right here is a cell, and this is built in the Unity game engine. We did it that way because really it's the only way to do it. You couldn't use video. And earlier you saw some flashing, it looked like a strobe light. We were trying to sort of show, in some ways, what the experience of hallucinating is like. And again, and that wasn't something we just made up. We talked to a half a dozen inmates who described in detail what it was like to be in virtual reality. And what makes this journalism and not just an experience is that every single frame of this was reported and rigorously reported. Everything down to the books you see sitting next to the bed. Those are the actual titles that inmates told us that they had in solitary confinement. And so in that sense, it meets every criteria of journalism and is a new way, I think, of telling stories. So I'm particularly excited about VR, and we're going to do quite a bit more of it. Okay, so why? Why are we doing Why are we investing all this time, money, resource? Why are we doing this? What is it just because it's fun or cool or whatever? I actually think it's more important. It goes a lot deeper than that. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to The Guardian in particular. It hasn't been a banner year for The Guardian per se financially. We've had, yeah, it's been bad. I look for an opportunity to use that transition every single time I can. In that case, it's pretty appropriate. We are struggling, and it's not just us. There's a lot of news organizations who are going through the same thing. This is print advertising over the last 7 years, and then projected 2 years into the future. I don't know if you can detect a trend here at all. This is the UK, similar, but slightly less slope. Weirdly, in the UK, it's strange. In the UK, in the US, I think we've all gotten the message that the days of print are numbered, and numbered with a big capital N. In the UK, weirdly, because the slope has been a little less abrupt, it's almost like boiling frogs a little bit, you know the old adage about boiling frogs? That's just absolutely not going to translate. Why am I doing that? That is not a thing, I think, in Spanish, boiling frogs. You have no idea. Those of you with headsets have no idea why I'm talking about frogs right now. It is not, forget it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to do something different. There's no recognition, really, in the UK, or much less, that print really isn't a viable thing. In fact, last year, Trinity Mirror actually launched a new print product. And everyone, I'm sorry, look, I'm not like some freaking, mind reader. I can't see the future or anything like that. But people who kind of know or had seen this chart thought, this is the most absurd thing I've ever heard in our life. It's crazy. And they were very defensive. No, it's going to work great, this is the future of news, and it was gone in 9 months. Okay, so that's where things are headed. Worryingly, for those who love print, and I have to say, I among them, I've been a print reporter my entire career. I carted a big box, like this big, over the Atlantic, filled with clips going all the way back to my college paper. I love print, but I'm not going to risk the future of journalism because I happen to love a particular platform. That's wrong. And unfortunately, if you look at it by age, within age cohorts, this is the reality. We're seeing this massive cohort of people coming up who are younger, and they wouldn't touch a print paper if you paid them. And I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. But this is the kind of thing that I show a bunch of print reporters, and they kind of go, ooh, well, that's not good. Well, yeah, it's not good, and it has been not good for quite a while. And then, obviously, the rise of social and platforms and different distribution channels and ways that people are now getting news, everything from Snapchat to WhatsApp to Facebook, you name it, and the disintermediation of news. And all of this adds up to one thing, which for The Guardian looks a little bit like that. So digital advertising for us was going gangbusters for years and years and years until last year. And it fell off a cliff last year. We projected 10% increase, it actually declined by 3%. Why? Why did it decline by 3%? Because news is not alone. It's not just news that is suddenly getting sucked into these platforms, Facebooks of the world. It's not news, it's content generally. And advertisers are realizing that if you want to reach certain audiences, that's the way to reach them, through Facebook, through Google. So Pew did a study last year, and I think estimated something like 75 cents of every new advertising dollar is going to Facebook and Google. And the rest, that other 25%, that other 25 cents, everyone else is splitting that 25 cents. Everyone. The entire internet is splitting that 25%. That is scary, and that's what you're seeing right there. And print advertising for us, unfortunately, is decreasing even faster. So the dotted line there is what we projected, and the orange is going. So again, why are we doing, and as I said before, we're not alone. The New York Times is seeing the same thing. Gannett is seeing the same thing. News organizations, particularly on the print side, are seeing the same thing over and over and over. And I hate to say this, but I'm pretty sure broadcast is not far behind. So what do we need, and what do we need right now? Actually, now might be already too late. I'm sorry, this is getting really depressing, but The truth is, what do we need right now? We need new revenue streams. We need new products. And we need the newsroom to be intimately involved in both of those things. And why does a newsroom need to be involved in both of those things? Because for years, anyone who's ever worked in a traditional news organization will probably tell you that my experience is similar to yours. That there is a product team, there is a technology team, there might be other design teams, UX, and they are sequestered in a different part of the building, maybe several floors away. They could be in a completely different building. There's no interaction whatsoever. They do product development, they do new products, but they do it in their world with no interaction with the newsroom, and it's ridiculous. And so what are we doing? We're producing a daily stream of content designed for a legacy platform, in this case, a newspaper. We're producing newspaper-shaped things, and we're trying to shove those newspaper-shaped things into mobile phones, onto tablets, and trying to make new products out of them. That is absurd. So it has to start with the content. The content needs to be part of the product process. And really the newsroom is the one that need to actually get on board with this, which is my own personal challenge, something I've been trying to do for years and years. Because without the newsroom, it's basically a two-legged stool, right? You've got product, you've got commercial, and you've got nothing else. You don't have the core, you don't have the content, and we need that. And so the team that I run, Visuals, is about as close as it gets. I look at that team as being the sort of beachhead in the newsroom for product design, product development. And if it's used properly, that beachhead can grow and grow and grow and grow. Because all those interactive things that I showed you earlier, especially something like the VR project, all of that is, in a sense, product. And if journalists can get on board with that, it's not a big leap to imagine that they can't get on board with everything else and really get on board with our trying to move rapidly into a better future. And so when I say it comes down to all of this sort of thing and interaction and participation and working with our readers, that's where it starts. That's where great products start, is what problems are you trying to solve and for whom? Who are you trying to reach? Who's your audience? What do they want from you? What can you do? And so that's why I say, really, fundamentally, great starting place for this conversation would be this. What would a fully joined up, meaning editorial, commercial, product, UX technology, news organization that puts readers at the heart of absolutely everything look like? What would that thing look like? I can tell you it wouldn't look like The Guardian. Thank you very much.